Hey everybody, welcome back. We're doing something a little different today. Today we're diving into a YouTube video called The Problem with Divestors
Ooh.
by a creator named Hammer. And this is one that's got some people talking online, and
Yes, it
it's,
has.
it's kind of a spicy one.
It is.
We're going to be talking about interracial relationships within the Black community
Right.
and kind of all the issues surrounding that. So,
Yeah, some sensitive topics in this one for sure. Hammer in this video is focusing on what he calls divestors, this trend specifically amongst certain black women that he's observing.
yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this is that he kind of connects this divestor trend to other we've seen Sister, You Should Be With Me, encouraging black men to date outside their race.
Right.
And then you've got Passable Bros, which is black men trying to assimilate into non-black communities.
Right.
And it's just like these ideas that keep circling back,
They
but
do.
with a slightly different spin each time. I just thought it was so interesting.
And it's really interesting because you know what's fascinating about all of these trends is that they kind of are all touching upon similar themes, belonging, identity, and societal pressures, and they're all kind of a reflection of trying to navigate a very complex social landscape where race plays such a significant role.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get too far into this, I think it's probably good for our listeners to kind of unpack these terms a little bit.
Okay.
Can you just explain a little bit more about what each signifies and kind of the context behind them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, divestors, Hammer uses that term to refer to black women who are choosing to only date or marry outside of their race.
Gotcha.
It is a loaded term. It has
Yeah.
sparked a lot of discussion as to what's driving this choice.
Right. And then sister is Sister, You Should Be With Me. And that seems to be targeted at black men,
Correct.
almost as a way to persuade them to look outside their race for partners.
Yeah, exactly. And it was very much a thing online,
Yeah.
where you would see these posts or whatever with this hashtag. And, oftentimes it was presented with this argument of black women being too difficult or not meeting certain standards. So, of course, it sparked its own set of controversies as well.
Of course. And then you've got Passable Bros, which is kind of describing black men who are downplaying their blackness to fit into predominantly white spaces.
Yeah, and it touches on this idea of assimilation and the pressure to conform to the dominant cultural norms,
Right.
which can be a very complex and personal struggle.
Yeah. Now, getting back to Hammer's video, one of his main arguments is that this divestor movement is coming from a place of feeling overlooked, almost like some black women are feeling sidelined because they see successful black men dating outside of their race.
Okay.
And he even goes so far as to speculate as it's fueled by jealousy and a desire to kind of get back at black men.
That's a very provocative statement. And I think, it's really important to kind of approach these motivations with a little bit more nuance.
Sure.
While resentment might be a factor for some, I think it's important to kind of look at the broader context as well. Black women have legitimate concerns about representation, societal pressures, and just the complexities of navigating a dating landscape where race plays such a significant role.
Right. So it's like reducing their motivations to just jealousy oversimplifies a much more complex issue.
Exactly. And, it's important to remember that every individual has their own unique experiences and reasons for making the relationship choices that they make.
Absolutely.
You can't make sweeping generalizations about an entire group of people.
Right. Now, Hammer goes on to outline four key reasons why he believes this divesting trend might not actually lead to the outcome some women might be hoping for.
Okay.
And these are cultural clashes, familial issues, challenges related to raising children, and societal consequences.
Okay.
So I'm curious to get your take on how significant these factors really are.
Well, let's start with cultural clashes.
Yeah.
Hammer argues that differing cultural backgrounds can lead to misunderstandings and the constant need for explanations
Right.
in interracial relationships. It's like
Yeah.
you're always bridging two worlds,
Right.
and that can be exhausting.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, how much do shared values and cultural understanding really matter in the long run?
That is an excellent question. I think having a foundation of shared values is really important in any relationship,
Sure.
but it becomes even more crucial when you're navigating cultural differences.
Okay, so cultural clashes are one potential pitfall.
Right.
And then he moves on to familial issues,
Yes.
emphasizing the potential for non-acceptance from the non-black partner's family.
Right.
And he talks about the emotional toll this can take on the individual, and the relationship as a whole.
Yeah, and it's not just about the couple themselves, it's about the broader social circles that they inhabit and how those intersect.
Sure.
Family dynamics can be incredibly complex, and introducing racial differences into that mix can definitely create challenges.
He then moves on to children, which is a really sensitive topic.
Yes, it is.
Hammer points out that biracial children might face identity challenges
Right.
and even racism from the non-black family members.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how prepared are you to deal with those kinds of situations as a parent.
Absolutely. It raises this question of how do you equip your children to navigate those complexities while also fostering a strong sense of self and belonging in them.
And then finally, he gets into societal consequences,
Okay.
specifically the fear of being excommunicated from the black community if the relationship fails, especially if there are children involved.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like this fear of rejection from both sides.
It is. It's this idea of belonging and the potential to feel caught between two worlds.
To kind of illustrate these points, Hammer uses a few really powerful anecdotes.
Okay.
He talks about a black woman who dates white men and ends up experiencing racism firsthand,
Oh, wow.
even being called the N-word by a partner.
Wow.
And it's just a stark reminder of the reality of racism and how it can permeate even the most intimate relationship.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it also highlights the importance of recognizing that while love is a powerful force,
Yeah.
it doesn't erase the realities of systemic racism and prejudice that still exists.
He also shares a story about a half-white friend whose father is openly racist and resents his daughter's black identity.
Okay.
So it's a powerful example of how generational trauma and ingrained prejudice can really impact families.
Yeah, these anecdotes are really thought-provoking, and it makes you wonder, are these isolated incidents,
Yeah.
or are they symptoms of larger systemic issues?
Right.
And I think that's a crucial question to consider as we're delving into this topic.
Yeah, they certainly add a layer of complexity to the whole conversation.
They do.
And then Hammer brings up Jonathan Majors' situation
Okay.
as an example of how interracial relationships can lead to societal challenges and even legal battles.
It's a complex case with many layers, and it's still unfolding.
Sure.
But it does raise some important questions about the intersection of race, relationships, and public perception.
So it seems like Hammer is acknowledging that there are issues and challenges within the black community.
Yeah.
But he's advocating for finding solutions within that community rather than seeking solace or validation in other groups.
Right.
It's like he's calling for a strengthening from within.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I think it speaks to this desire for self-determination and community empowerment.
Right.
The sense of wanting to address internal challenges head on rather than seeking external solutions.
It's like he's saying, let's work on ourselves before we look outward for answers.
Exactly, and I think that resonates with a lot of people who are looking for ways to build stronger, more resilient communities.
And it's not just about romantic relationships, right? This bleeds into the broader question of belonging, finding your place, and understanding the historical and societal forces that have shaped black identity.
Absolutely. It's about understanding where you fit in the larger social fabric and how to navigate the complexities of race and identity in a society that's still grappling with its own legacy of inequality.
It sounds like there's a lot more to unpack here.
There is.
What else does Hammer have to say about these trends and their potential impact on the black community as a whole?
Well, he actually makes some pretty bold claims about why he thinks that these movements, including divesters, CSBN, and passable bros, are ultimately failing to deliver on their promises. And it all comes down to this idea of a disconnect from reality.
Okay.
And he uses a very striking analogy to get his point across.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He uses this image of being a guest in someone else's community, never truly belonging, always being reminded of your outsider status. And it really speaks to the limitations of assimilation and the importance of embracing one's own cultural heritage.
I see what you mean. It's like you might be welcomed in,
Right.
but you're never fully part of the family, so to speak.
Exactly. And he argues that these movements operate on a very superficial level,
Okay.
ignoring the deeper societal structures and power dynamics that are at play.
So he's not just critiquing individual choices, he's saying these trends are ignoring the bigger picture.
Precisely. And to illustrate this point, he points to real-life examples.
Okay.
Like the woman who experienced racism from her white partner,
Right.
highlighting the inherent risks and potential for disillusionment.
Yeah, I remember that anecdote. It was pretty jarring to hear her experience. Do you think those kinds of stories are common, or are they outliers?
That's a very difficult question to answer definitively.
Sure.
Individual experiences vary widely, but I think they do point to these systemic realities that can't be ignored.
So while there might be individual success stories,
Right.
there are also potential pitfalls that can't be overlooked.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from Hammer's video.
Uh,
It's a call for a more nuanced and critical conversation around race, relationships, and belonging.
It makes you wonder what else he has to say about how these issues play out in the real world,
Yeah.
and what it all means for the future of Black identity and community building. I guess we'll have to keep diving deeper to find out.
Indeed, there's still much more to explore, and I'm eager to unpack those complexities with you.
Me too. Stay with us. Okay, so we've been talking about these trends like divestors, cisbm, and passable bros, and how they all kind of relate to this idea of, finding belonging and navigating this complex social landscape.
Right.
Where does Hammer kind of go with this next?
Well, he makes this interesting observation that a lot of the people who are pushing these ideologies online aren't actually living them out in their own lives.
Hmm.
He suggests that it's more about performance and seeking attention or validation online
Okay.
rather than genuine belief or action.
That's fascinating. So it's like this disconnect between online persona and real-world behavior.
Right.
It really makes you question the authenticity of some of these voices and the motivations behind these movements.
It highlights the need to be critical of the information that we consume online,
Yeah.
even from those who present themselves as authorities or experts on these topics.
He even brings up Meghan Markle as an example.
Okay.
Someone who seemingly had it all,
Right.
loved fame, wealth,
Right.
but still faced intense scrutiny and hostility because of her racial identity.
Yeah.
It's a pretty high-profile example of how societal structures can limit individual agency, even for those with privilege and power.
Absolutely. It just shows how deeply ingrained societal biases can be
Right.
and how they can manifest in very unexpected ways.
And then he circles back to the Jonathan Majors case,
Okay.
arguing that it demonstrates how easily a Black man can be vilified,
Yeah.
and how the justice system may not always operate fairly when race is a factor.
It's a complex case, as we mentioned earlier, and it's still unfolding, but it does raise concerns about racial bias within the legal system
Right.
and how that can impact the lives of individuals and communities.
So where does Hammer ultimately land on all of this? What's his main takeaway?
Well, I wouldn't say that he offers a definitive solution
Okay.
or a clear-cut answer.
Okay.
It's more of a call to action for deeper reflection.
Okay.
And a more nuanced conversation around race, relationships, and belonging.
Gotcha.
He's not condemning interracial relationships outright,
Right.
but he is urging viewers to move beyond superficial desires
Okay.
or fleeting trends and engage in a more profound level of self-reflection and community building.
It's almost like he's saying before you divest,
Right.
consider what you're investing in and why,
Yeah.
and what are you potentially leaving behind.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
He's encouraging a more critical examination of motivation
Okay.
and a deeper understanding of the complexities involved.
Right.
He wants people to consider the long-term implications of these trends and how they might impact the Black community as a whole.
So no easy answers, but definitely a lot to unpack and think
A
about.
lot to unpack.
What's the one thing you hope listeners take away from this deep dive?
I think the most crucial takeaway is the importance of having open and honest conversations about these complex issues.
Okay.
We need to move beyond simplistic narratives and engage with the nuances of race, identity, and belonging.
Well said. And on that note, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the problem with divestors. We hope this has sparked some critical thinking and maybe even some healthy debate.
Knowledge is most powerful when it's shared and discussed, so keep those conversations going, and until next time, keep diving deep.
It really feels like this video is pushing us to kind of think beyond just the individual level
Right.
and consider the collective impact of these trends.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He is challenging us to look at how these personal choices and online discussions might be shaping the future of Black identity and community building as a whole.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big question to grapple with.
Definitely. And it's not even about just agreeing or disagree with his specific points.
Right.
It's about using this as kind of a springboard for a deeper conversation.
Exactly. And, it's about engaging with those uncomfortable truths about ourselves
Yeah.
and the society that we live in.
Right.
And it's about recognizing that, these conversations are ongoing.
Right.
There's no easy fix.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It sounds like he's really advocating for personal responsibility
Mm.
and a more proactive approach to kind of shaping the future of the Black community.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play
Yep.
in building a more just and equitable future, both within our own communities and outside of them.
So what do you think, where do we go from here? What are some of the key questions that we should be asking ourselves as we kind of move forward?
Well, I think one of the most important questions is how we can foster a more genuine understanding
Okay.
and bridge the divides that separate us. How can we create spaces for open and honest dialogue about race identity and belonging? And how can we move beyond blame and judgment to actually find common ground and work towards shared goals?
Those are some pretty big questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers.
Right.
But I do think it's important to keep asking them and to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. And I think it starts with each of us, taking responsibility for our own actions and choices,
Okay.
being mindful of the impact that we have on others, and working to create a more inclusive and welcoming world for everyone.
Well said. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
This deep dive into the problem with divestors has been really thought-provoking, and I hope it's given our listeners a lot to consider.
Remember, these are complex issues and there's no one right answer.
Right.
The most important thing is to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging in meaningful dialogue.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.